"Where's my wedding dress?" she cried. The bridesmaid pointed to the fire. The room was filled with laughter and music, soft and sweet like a summer evening. But inside the bridal suite, everything felt like it was unraveling. Emily. Carter's hands trembled as she searched frantically through the closet. "Where's my wedding dress?" she cried, her voice cracking like glass. The anticipation of her big day was suddenly shattered by panic. Her closest bridesmaid, Sarah Jenkins, stood frozen near the door, eyes wide and voice barely a whisper. "Emily, there's been a fire," she said, nodding toward the hallway, where smoke still curled faintly in the air. Emily's heart stopped. The dress, years of dreaming, every stitch and bead, was gone. She sank onto the velvet chair, the weight of the moment crushing her. Outside, the celebration carried on, oblivious to the devastation unfolding behind closed doors. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now everything was slipping away in flames. Emily sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the empty space where her wedding dress should have been. Her breathing was shallow, the tremble in her hands now fading into a quiet, stunned silence. No words came out, just a hollow pause that filled the room like a heavy fog. Sarah, her bridesmaid, shifted uneasily, biting her lip but staying silent. She knew Emily needed space, yet her eyes betrayed the guilt she felt, as if she wanted to say more but held back, afraid to worsen the pain. Across the room, Jake, Emily's fiancé, stood with his arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. His silence wasn't cold. It was the kind that screamed helplessness. He wanted to fix this, to say something reassuring, but the weight of the disaster stole all his confidence. Emily's mother, Linda, hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. Her quiet tears betrayed the heartbreak she felt for her daughter. She wanted to speak, to offer comfort, but instead she only watched, the room thick with unspoken sorrow. Just as the silence began to suffocate the room, the sharp ring of the front doorbell shattered the stillness. Emily's heart skipped, a flicker of hope, or was it dread, sparking in her chest. She hesitated, then moved toward the door, the weight of the moment pressing down on every step. When she opened it, there stood a man she barely recognized. Michael, the quiet neighbor from down the street, usually keeping to himself. His eyes were calm but carried an unmistakable warmth, like a steady anchor in the middle of chaos. He held something in his hands, a small, carefully folded package wrapped in brown paper. "I found this near the fire," Michael said softly, voice steady but urgent. "I thought you should have it." Emily's breath caught as she took the package. The neighbors had seen the fire. Everyone had heard about the disaster that had swallowed so much in minutes. But no one expected this stranger to arrive with what felt like a lifeline. Slowly, she unfolded the paper, and there it was. Her wedding dress, singed at the edges, but intact enough to bring back memories she thought were lost forever. Michael's presence broke the frozen spell in the room. Sarah stepped forward, relief flooding her eyes, while Jake's tense shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Even Linda's trembling hands steadied as she reached out, touched the delicate fabric, and let out a shaky breath. In that moment, amidst the smoke and ashes, a fragile thread of hope was woven back into their shattered world, an unexpected savior, offering more than just a dress. After Michael handed over the dress, he didn't rush away like a passing stranger. Instead, he stepped inside the dim living room, where the faint smell of smoke still lingered in the air. He didn't say much. Words felt heavy here, but his presence alone began to soften the tension gripping the family. Emily, still clutching the dress, glanced up at him, unsure if she could trust this quiet man who'd appeared like a guardian angel. Michael noticed her hesitation but didn't press for conversation. Instead, he took a seat on the worn-out sofa, carefully folding his hands in his lap, radiating calm. Sarah moved closer, her eyes wary but curious. "Why did you bring this to us?" she finally asked, voice low, almost breaking. Michael looked toward the window, where the first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything in a moment," he said quietly. "Sometimes, when the world falls apart, you need someone to stand beside you. even if it's just in silence. There was no grand promise or easy fix in his words, just a simple truth. Slowly, the walls between them began to lower. Sarah reached out and took the dress from Emily's hands, running her fingers over the fabric gently, like touching a lifeline. Jake pulled his chair closer to Michael's, the rough edges of his anger softening into something like gratitude. Linda wiped tears from her cheeks, no longer trying to hide them, feeling safe enough to be vulnerable for the first time in days. Michael didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he let it stretch comfortably, like a quiet space where wounds could breathe and begin to heal. In that shared calm, trust started to build, not through loud declarations, but through simple presence and steady support. For the first time since the fire, they weren't alone. The room had gone still, like the hush that falls before a storm breaks. Michael remained seated, calm, waiting, not for answers, but for the space to be safe enough for the truth to breathe. Sarah stood at the edge of the living room, her hands still clutching the edge of the scorched wedding dress. Her mouth trembled as if words were fighting their way out, and for a moment she seemed afraid they'd break her. "I worked 3 jobs," she whispered, not looking at anyone. "I skipped every holiday, every birthday, every chance to rest, just so I could have that one day, just one moment where I felt like I mattered, like I belonged to someone fully." Her voice cracked and the words hung in the air like smoke. Michael didn't flinch. He just nodded once, gently, giving her permission to go on. Emily reached for her sister's hand, and Sarah didn't pull away. "I trusted her," she said, the tears coming now, hot and fast. "I trusted my best friend with everything. The dress, the plans, the ring, the music, even the vows I hadn't finished writing. And she looked me in the eye that morning, like everything was fine." She paused. Her throat moved with a heavy swallow. "And then I walked outside and saw my dreams burning." Michael's expression didn't shift into pity, just quiet, respectful grief. Jake had gone pale, staring at the floor, one leg bouncing nervously. "What happened next?" he asked, softly. Sarah looked at him, and her face twisted in pain. She said it was an accident, that the iron tipped over, but the look in her eyes told the truth. There was no panic, no regret, just victory. The room filled with stunned silence. Emily gasped, her hand over her mouth. "She did it on purpose?" Jake asked, his voice sharp now. "Your best friend?" Sarah nodded. "She was supposed to be my maid of honor, but the moment I got engaged, something changed. She started pulling away, subtle things. Then I found out she'd been talking to Adam, texting him behind my back. He told me I was paranoid." Linda, who hadn't spoken until now, leaned forward. "Where is he now?" she asked, though her voice carried a knowing sadness. "Gone," Sarah answered, one word dripping with finality. "They're both gone. Disappeared before I even made it to the church. My phone died. My car broke down. I had to walk back to the house in my dress, and by the time I got here, it was ashes." Michael finally shifted forward, his eyes soft but fierce. "That wasn't your fault." Sarah looked at him, startled. "You did everything right. You gave your heart to people who didn't deserve it, but that doesn't make your love any less real. What they destroyed wasn't just a dress. It was a piece of you." Sarah's eyes filled again, but this time, the tears were gentler. Not helpless, just raw. The pain that had been frozen inside her chest for days finally found a path to escape. She cried, not in shame, but with the desperate relief of someone no longer pretending to be okay. Emily moved to her side, wrapping her arms around her. Linda joined, then Jake. And still, Michael remained near, his presence anchoring the chaos of emotion into something safe. This wasn't just about a wedding. It never had been. It was about betrayal, about grief, about losing a version of yourself you thought would finally be seen. And in the middle of that loss, Sarah had held herself together with invisible stitches. But now they were allowed to come undone, not to fall apart. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky remained heavy with gray. Sarah hadn't slept. Her body rested, but her mind roamed through every memory, every lie, every time she swallowed her intuition for the sake of keeping peace. But this time there would be no more swallowing. She sat at the edge of the porch, the scorched edges of her dress now folded beside her, cleaned of ash but still singed by betrayal. Her eyes were swollen but clear. She wasn't broken, just wide awake for the first time in months. Behind her, Michael stepped outside, offering a mug of warm tea without saying a word. She took it. Their silence had grown comfortable now, like they didn't need to explain what had already been understood in the quiet. "I need to see her," Sarah said. Michael didn't ask why. He only nodded. 2 hours later, Sarah stood on the sidewalk outside a small studio apartment building, the same place Rachel had moved into months ago after quitting her job, claiming she needed space to find herself. Sarah had visited once briefly. Now, the walk up the front steps felt like stepping into a chapter she'd never meant to reopen. Rachel answered the door barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's old sweaters. Her eyes flickered when she saw who it was. Hesitation, then a smile, thin and artificial. "Sarah, wow, I didn't think—" "Don't," Sarah said calmly. Rachel stepped back, uncertain. "Come in?" Sarah walked past her before she had to be invited twice. The apartment was clean but sparse. On the counter sat a champagne flute next to a half-eaten chocolate croissant. There were candles burning, too many for this time of day. "I didn't come to fight," Sarah said, turning to face her. "I came to understand, but only if you're ready to be honest." Rachel's mask faltered. "You think I set your dress on fire on purpose?" Sarah didn't answer. She just stared. Rachel fidgeted. I was ironing it like you asked. I got distracted. I went to the kitchen." "You weren't ironing," Sarah cut in. "There was no iron, just a lighter, some torn fabric, and a pile of ashes in the middle of the patio." Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. "I didn't come here for an apology," Sarah continued. "I came here to say this. What you did broke something in me. But it also woke something up. You didn't take away my wedding. You freed me from a life I didn't see was already falling apart." Rachel stepped back, wounded by the calmness in Sarah's voice. "So that's it? You just hate me now?" Sarah looked around, then met her eyes again. "No, I don't hate you. I pity you." Rachel stiffened. "You had love, loyalty, a sisterhood. And you chose jealousy. You chose destruction. Not just of a dress, but of something pure. And that choice, that's going to follow you long after this." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but Sarah held up a hand. "I'm done," she said, softly. "I needed to face you, not for closure, for clarity, because I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not carrying your choices as my burden." Then she turned, calm and upright, and walked out the door. Rachel stood there, alone, surrounded by things that were never hers to begin with. Sarah didn't look back. She didn't need to, because the power was hers again, and for the first time, in a long time, she felt whole. The late afternoon sun poured in through the windows of Michael's art studio, spilling across the wooden floors and casting gold across every canvas, every quiet corner. Sarah stood by the window, her fingers tracing the rim of the tea mug in her hands. It had been 2 weeks since she'd walked away from Rachel. 2 weeks since the ashes of her wedding dress had stopped being a wound and started becoming a lesson. Silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt earned. Michael stepped in from the back, a smudge of blue paint across his forearm, and without saying anything, set something gently on the workbench beside her. Sarah turned. It was a box. Old, weathered, wrapped with twine. Inside, her mother's veil. Somehow salvaged from the chaos of that night. Michael had gone back for it when she didn't even have the strength to think about what had been left behind. Tears welled instantly, but not from pain. From knowing that someone saw her fully without asking her to shrink to be loved. She didn't speak. She simply took the veil and pressed it to her chest, breathing in the faded scent of lavender that still lingered from her mother's hands. She smiled. Soft, healing. Later that evening, they walked to the meadow just behind Michael's property, the sky blazing with orange and purple as the sun dipped low. Sarah carried a small bundle in her arms, not the burned wedding dress, but the remains of it. Folded gently in a linen cloth, now wrapped with wildflowers Michael had picked. Together, they dug a small space beneath the tree at the center of the field, a place Sarah had often passed but never really seen until now. She placed the bundle inside. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she whispered, "This isn't where the dream ends. It's where I make room for a new one." Michael said nothing, but he reached for her hand and she let him hold it. As they covered the bundle, the wind picked up slightly, just enough to lift a few petals from the flowers and carry them away. For, a moment. Sarah stood in the quiet, letting the air wrap around her. She wasn't a bride anymore. She wasn't a victim or a sister abandoned. She was something new. Someone rising from her own ashes, not like a phoenix, but like a woman who had finally returned to herself. The meadow rustled with life. The world hadn't ended. It had just begun again. The veil now resting on her bedside table would one day see light again. Not as a symbol of what was lost, but as a reminder of everything she reclaimed. Love, dignity, freedom, herself. And when she smiled, truly smiled, Michael looked at her the way no one ever had before. Not as something to possess, but as someone to honor. And in that moment, Sarah knew she hadn't lost a wedding. She had found a beginning. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe for more unforgettable, emotional, and viral true stories. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world are you watching from.